That guy just wanted to live. He really wanted to live. But at that moment, the doctor was giving him terrible news. The patient's name was Kim Isaac, and the disease he had would eventually bear his name because it was something completely unknown. Of course, the doctor didn't want to deliver that news, but he had no choice. Isaac had only 6 months to live. As he walked down the street, Isaac felt nothing but despair. He thought he'd worked like a dog his whole life, only to end up like this, condemned to die. He crossed the street without looking for oncoming cars, completely lost, until someone had to pull him back from being run over. Kneeling on the pavement, he felt as though he'd been handed a death sentence, and it was on that very same day that he won the lottery. Even so, he thought the only thing he truly wanted was to stay alive. He didn't want to die. He would be happy with anything, so he made a plea to whatever deity might be listening. Don't let me die. What he didn't expect was to live like that. He was reincarnated as a bald skeleton, a body so miserable he couldn't even care for himself. At that moment, demons began attacking him, and Isaac reacted swiftly with his great demon blade. He slaughtered them all easily. After staining his sword with blood once more, he looked back and saw the last enemy, a monstrous, gigantic demon. But Isaac managed to dodge its attack. He thought that at last everything was about to end. He charged forward and swiftly cut the creature's neck, ending the battle. When the beast's body fell, he understood that the subjugation of the rebel forces was finally complete. Isaac reflected on how, after being reborn as the weakest demon, he had evolved into a lich, the king of the dead. He had revived an entire demon civilization that had been destroyed centuries ago. He was even a bit proud. Despite being bald, he was now a king. Everyone celebrated him, but everyone called him Isak instead of Isaac, and he thought those idiots didn't even know how to pronounce his name correctly. Even so, he left. People asked where he was going, and he walked on in silence, thinking he was owed his reward. He wanted to eat lousy food again, but real food, and he wanted to get back to doing his things like any human being. He wanted to become human again. So he threw the head of an ogre in front of a crowd of terrified onlookers, and in that moment, he ascended the steps of the divine realm to meet the entities who had made a pact with him. Isaac told them he had killed all his enemies, as promised, and that the deal still stood. According to the contract, he was to become human again. The deities asked if he truly had slain them all, a task they thought would take 500 years, but he was already done. The people around began to whisper that even some nobles were working for him for free. Isaac replied that he'd heard everything and wondered why they babbled so much. Hadn't they said he'd become human if he defeated every enemy? One of the gods, standing at the center, asked if he could perform one more service. Isaac flew into a rage. Even as a skeleton, he thought it was time for them to stop. He asked if they were trying to turn him into a slave. He thought that even though they were gods, he would annihilate them all. His aura grew intense and terrifying. Then he wondered, had they made him work all this time without even knowing how to restore him to human form? One of the goddesses replied that it seemed he was finally beginning to understand. Another god confessed that he had known from the start that this would end badly. Isaac, furious, asked if that was all they had to say. He declared that apart from the forgotten summoning technique, those gods could neither create nor destroy. He reminded them he wasn't a living being, but an undead. If they couldn't restore him, he could put the entire divine realm at risk. The gods begged for more time, offering him the chance to make more requests. But Isaac responded that as payment for their broken promise, he would kill them all. He vowed to turn them into skeletons as he amassed his power. A monstrous aura grew around his body. Suddenly, however, that energy began to fade until it disappeared completely. Isaac realized he could no longer use magic and that his body was paralyzed. He wondered what was happening. One of the gods explained that it was useless to resist. They had written the wrong name in the spell. They had written Isaac, not Isaac, but the spell still worked. This technique had been used in the past to seal disasters like him. The god told him he should be grateful for what they had done. For now, he would live as an insect. Isaac looked at his new body and saw it was that of a small, weak caterpillar. He wondered why he couldn't at least be a hairy caterpillar. The god mocked him further, saying he was still obsessed with hair. Suddenly, Isaac's body began to glow. He thought all those people were idiots, and that if they were going to do that to him, they should have done it properly from the start. He'd rather kill himself than live as an insect. Then, his body shone brightly, and he screamed inside that they should all eat shit. Immediately afterward, a massive explosion tore through the cathedral of the divine realm. Smoke engulfed everything, and as it began to clear, everyone tried to understand what had happened. Isaac had vanished. One of the gods said he was probably sealed inside that insect along with the Demon King. With the Demon King finally out of the picture, some began to think they could reclaim power over that world, but the gods knew it was too early to relax. They decided to erect a perfect barrier between the sacred world and the human world. They vowed to exterminate all demons. Meanwhile, one of the gods who had used great power was asked if he was all right. He replied that it didn't matter, because now the demon king had become a tiny cockroach. He would remain trapped there forever, and they would make him feel pain. At that moment, Isaac wondered if he had been deceived by the gods. He asked himself if he'd been dumbed down, since skeletons don't have brains. Everything around him was so bright. He realized he had eyes again. He felt something strange when he touched his own skin. It was soft. He looked at his hands and realized he was in a human body. He then wondered if the seal had failed. A maid approached, calling him baby, and saying he had finally awakened. She told him he had slept so well and asked why he woke up now. Isaac didn't know who these people were. He truly had become human again. But to his surprise, the maid said she felt a bit guilty about it, but she had to do her job. They said they would put him back to sleep again, this time, forever, and in peace. Isaac thought he had just died and was about to die again. The maid was ready to poison his bottle, but when she tried, little Isaac dodged every attempt. The maid began to question herself and asked why he wasn't drinking. Isaac thought he would never eat something so suspicious, but at the same time, he wondered why he had become human. At that moment, the servants called him Isaac. It was exactly the same name as before. He thought the pronunciation of his true name had always been Isaac, with the same intonation. The problem was that the gods used a different pronunciation. They said Isaac, slightly altering the sound. Because of that, the seal hadn't worked. The seal needed to contain the exact name of the person sealed, and the gods had erred. He still thought that, besides that, he had reincarnated into a body with the same name, and everything indicated those idiots had even made a mistake when crafting the seal. It was at that moment the maid managed to get the bottle to his mouth, and everyone began to wonder why that child was so strong. Isaac thought it was just vegetable juice, so what were they trying to kill him with? Food poisoning? But he soon realized something was wrong. He felt a strange reaction in his body. Meanwhile, in the temple of the Holy Empire of Hela, an old man strolled through the chambers, thinking that the baby would soon meet his end. Then a figure appeared before him and remarked that he looked well. This man was Alexander Heathcliff Hela, Emperor of the Holy Empire of Hela. The old bishop bowed before the empire's son, and the emperor asked what he was doing there. The bishop replied he had come to see the candidate for sainthood of House Joshua because he needed to sense the presence of one who would become a saint. The emperor commented that judging by how he spoke, it sounded like a burden, and said nothing could go wrong with a saint under the care of the Holy See. The bishop said he didn't know what he was talking about, but suddenly everyone heard crying from inside the temple. They all ran to the nursery, and the emperor asked what had happened to the young master. The excited maid explained that the boy was very adorable and had eaten so much his belly was full. They said he had already drunk 15 bottles of vegetable juice. When the bishop heard this, he froze. He thought it impossible. How was that child still alive? He knew it wasn't just vegetable juice. A few minutes earlier, Isaac had realized the liquid wasn't mere juice. He soon understood it was poison, and not just any poison. It was sacred poison, an extremely powerful kind capable of destroying any divine power. Its effects weren't immediate, but if accumulated in large quantities, it could even kill. However, this poison was made with demon mana, and Isaac had been a demon. That's why, to him, the taste was delightful. He was loving it and absorbing vast amounts of mana. Moreover, he tossed the bottle aside and asked for another, of course, all in baby talk, but his wish was understood. The servant, unaware of the truth, was thrilled and brought more poison. Believing the effect wouldn't be immediate, Isaac kept drinking, happy to be accumulating so much mana, and he thought that now what he needed was to enter his own inner world to reach the deepest part of himself, the core of everything, his mana core. He began to focus all his energy and direct the absorbed mana to that core. As he did so, he prepared carefully, but suddenly he felt a magical explosion inside him. However, it didn't manifest in the way he expected. He was confused. The mana core was supposed to glow with one of the 3 primary colors, but at that moment, something very different happened. Then he wondered why the core was white, but he soon realized it wasn't just the color that stood out. There was an absurd amount of power in that core, even though it wasn't fully formed yet, since this body was still that of a baby. Isaac thought this surpassed all his expectations. He inched closer with difficulty and marveled at how blessed this body was. If he could grow properly within it, he could become an even greater monster than he ever imagined. Isaac had always chosen to survive. It was something deeply imprinted in his soul, a desire to remain alive at any cost. In the end, he became the genesis of the Skeleton King and acquired many unique and special abilities. Now, all those powers resided in this body because of his name and his soul, Isaac. Later, as he focused, the servants began to wonder if he had finally died. But Isaac merely lifted his little finger and everyone was surprised to realize he was still alive. Then, quite naturally, he asked for another bottle, this time, a stronger one. Back in the present, the emperor felt relieved, believing nothing bad had happened. But Isaac thought that, apart from the fact that Kermit had been killed right there, nothing else had really happened. He began to wonder why the bishop was watching him so intently. Had he eaten too much? But then he thought he couldn't raise suspicion, so he decided to act like a normal baby and smiled innocently. The bishop, however, found this outrageous. Instead of dying, that wretch was smiling at him, as if mocking him. This infuriated the bishop. A few days earlier, in the capital of the Holy Sidus, a man had remarked that whoever became the next saint would inherit the sacred empire. He said it was a tasteless joke. He also commented that this was why all the noble families were declaring their own children saints, which he found extremely annoying. That same bishop appeared and tried to calm him, saying not to worry. They would handle all the sainthood candidates. But the man known as the Chalice Man revealed that he'd heard an unpleasant rumor. There was a new sainthood candidate in House Joshua, which was troubling since that house was the emperor's right hand. The bishop said there was nothing they could do about it, but the Chalice Man angrily threw down his cup and declared the boy would likely die before ever reaching them. All the bishop needed to do was examine the body. After all, he said, the true saint could only come from his own house Barrett, led by the influential Cardinal Hay Barrett. In the present, the bishop pondered the intelligence he'd received. People said the baby was already dead, so why was that child still alive? He believed he couldn't allow things to stand like that. It was then that the emperor approached and remarked that the child was remarkable. His hair shone with a bright light, and noted that the founder of the sacred empire had the exact same hair color. Isaac realized in that moment that the man was the emperor. The emperor said the child seemed more blessed than the current pope himself, and declared that he must be the true sainthood candidate. Isaac was confused. He couldn't believe the body he had reincarnated into was a sainthood candidate. The bishop noticed the emperor's reaction and began to worry. He felt he could not allow that child to receive the emperor's favor, so the bishop asked to examine the child. The emperor asked what was wrong, and the bishop replied that something was very strange. It was impossible for a baby to have drunk so much vegetable juice. But the emperor replied calmly that he saw no issue with a sainthood candidate drinking so much. Meanwhile, Isaac wondered how a demon king could be mistaken for a sainthood candidate. The bishop continued insisting on examining him. It was then that Isaac, accidentally, burped and released a bit of the demonic energy he hadn't yet fully digested. He grew anxious, wondering if the bishop had noticed. The bishop stepped closer, his eyes fixed on him, and said he had sensed demonic energy emanating from that child. Wasn't that far too strange? Isaac didn't know if the bishop truly perceived something, or if he was merely grasping at an excuse to get rid of him. The bishop said the child could only be a false candidate, someone abusing mana, and demanded that an inquisitor be summoned immediately to examine him. The emperor was outraged and asked how he dared speak of a sainthood candidate that way, but the bishop replied calmly that there was no cause for concern. According to him, the pope had already decided the true saint would come from the Barretts. The emperor reflected and found it shameful that they would force the chosen child to come from the cardinal's own family. Meanwhile, Isaac understood the true motive behind it all. They wanted to get rid of him. The bishop then scooped Isaac into his arms under the pretext of taking him to the inquisitor, but the emperor intervened. He said that House Joshua was a close ally of the imperial family, and, as emperor, he strongly suggested the examination be carried out later. The bishop replied that he understood, but also asserted he had already spoken with the pope, and that the heir's blessing ceremony would only take place after the official selection of the new saint. The emperor realized they were trying to blackmail him. The pope planned to withhold recognition of his son as heir, unless he accepted Massa Barrett's choice. Isaac thought he was surrounded by a bunch of... He realized that continuing as a sainthood candidate was far too risky, as they could discover his true identity. Even so, the bishop proceeded with Isaac in his arms and said they would perform a sacred exorcism. If the child were truly human, he would suffer no ill effects. But it was in that moment that Isaac grabbed the bottle and struck the bishop forcefully in the face. The impact was so powerful that blood spurted and some teeth flew out. Isaac then thought that Bishop was the son of an extremely arrogant woman and decided to enter the fray in earnest. The bishop, still dazed, wondered how a bottle could hurt so much. The onlookers began to notice a strange light emanating from the object and asked if it was divine power. The bishop confirmed internally he had indeed sensed divine energy. At that moment, Isaac readied another strike with his enchanted bottle and began battering the bishop's face. He beat the bishop with his own bottle without mercy, while the bishop thought this must surely be real mana being used. The emperor watched it all with a smile, completely satisfied with what he saw. Isaac thought he would reinforce his bottle with protective magic, all the while maintaining the appearance of an innocent baby. Throughout, he wondered what that bishop thought of it. As he fought, Isaac felt something strange. Every time he used mana, an even greater magical power manifested. He began to realize that mana and divine power didn't mix, couldn't be used together, and this probably had to do with the white core inside him. But suddenly, the bishop seized the bottle and hurled it away in rage. He swore by everything he possessed that that baby was a sinner and that the exorcism must continue. Isaac thought that piece of trash hadn't given up yet. He didn't want to go that far, but in that moment, he pulled something very interesting out of the bishop's own robes. The bishop was terrified to see what Isaac was holding: a high-level sealed demonic body, a totem, a powerful artifact forged from the essence of a demon that had devoured others of its own kind and absorbed their mana. The bishop thought he had kept that totem for emergencies, in case he encountered a demon and needed to defend himself, but he wondered how exactly that baby knew of the object's existence. Without hesitation, Isaac simply tossed the totem aside because he was already fed up with that bishop. It was then that the totem's seal began to break, and the demon trapped inside started to awaken. Isaac thought those were the direct consequences of the bishop's own actions. He had unleashed the demon contained in that artifact, and now he could examine it at his leisure. The emperor watched the scene in shock and asked Bishop Masa Barrett what he was doing. Had he gone mad by releasing a high-level demon inside the temple? The bishop, in desperation, said the child was to blame. It was the baby who had thrown the totem. But the emperor replied that the totem was an object used to seal a demon beast. So how had it come back to life? Wasting no time, the emperor ordered all his forces present to protect his son, and as expected, they immediately took the child from the bishop's arms. Isaac thought that now he was the biggest joke of all, but it was then that the newly freed demon seemed to be staring directly at him. The monster said it needed to kill the saint, that it must end the saint immediately. Isaac didn't understand why this was happening, but the demon charged furiously at him. The knights protecting the temple formed a shield around the young master. Isaac wondered what was wrong with that demon. After all, he had just saved it. Still, he thought the paladins would be able to protect him, but no. The first paladin was knocked down like a rag doll. Isaac questioned whether that guy was even a real paladin, but he had no time to wonder further. The demon continued its onslaught, determined to kill him, and the paladins were being thrown aside like puppets. Isaac thought he should have subdued the creature first and wondered if anyone would notice if he used magic in this desperate situation. He also wondered why everyone wanted to kill him in this new life. The demon attacked him, and by instinct, Isaac reacted with a furious expression, glared at the monster with eyes full of hatred, and called it a demon. The demon paused for a moment at that insult and muttered in a low voice the words, "Demon King." In that moment, a strong radiance began to emanate from Isaac's body. It was a divine power so intense that everyone there was left speechless. The glow started to burn and melt the demon's body, forcing it to flee. The onlookers began to comment that this was divine power issuing directly from the baby's form. They said Isaac, so young, had driven away a mighty demon all on his own. While everyone was impressed by his feat, Isaac wondered if he really possessed divine power. He soon realized he had completely drained his mana. He reflected that his body seemed to convert mana into divine power, and began thinking about how he could accumulate more mana, since the Sacred Empire did not possess it in abundance. The bishop then began to shout, demanding Isaac be released. He claimed the baby was a heretic using demonic power, and asked how he dared crawl in there. The bishop said he would prove it all through an exorcism, but the emperor ordered him to be silent. He declared the bishop was unjustly accusing an innocent sainthood candidate, and that he himself had unwittingly released a demon in the temple. The emperor said this would not go unpunished, and that even though the bishop was of the Holy See, he would not escape the consequences. The bishop realized the emperor was beginning to suspect his true motives, and that if this happened, the Holy See would face even more trouble. He knew that even if he took the blame, he still had to protect his family. So he decided he would kill the future saint right then and there. Without hesitation, he performed a powerful invocation, summoning a great predatory beast, a wild and menacing spiritual creature. Isaac looked at that creature and thought that at last, that damned bishop had revealed his true nature. Even so, Isaac had no mana and knew he couldn't do much against that summoning. As the beast prepared to devour him, something stopped it. A powerful force held the creature back, and a voice rang out asking, "Who dares lay hands on the direct bloodline of House Joshua?" It was the Knights of House Joshua. Standing before them was the family's seventh son, Hilly Joshua. Hilly immediately ordered the bishop's execution for high treason. All the knights knelt before Isaac Ashe, recognizing him as their young master. Hilly apologized for arriving late. Isaac thought those people truly seemed powerful. Hilly then said they had brought a special gift for the little one. Isaac was curious, wondering if it would be a jewel, gold, or something shiny. But the gift presented was a statuette depicting the Demon King's decapitation. Soon after, they brought another, showing that same king burned to death, and another still, with a nun crushing the Demon King with holy force. Isaac, who in his past life had been the Demon King himself, did not like it one bit. He wondered how he would survive in a place like that. But the people around interpreted his tears as emotion, saying he had loved the gifts so much he was crying. Choking back shameful tears, Isaac finally remembered who the Joshuas were. They were the family of the saint who had killed him in his past life. Isaac recalled that every saint he'd slain in his previous life had belonged to House Joshua. He'd eliminated the 45th, the 61st, and now realized that not only was he a candidate for sainthood, but he also shared the lineage of the very saint who had slain him. He began to wonder what he'd done in that past life to deserve such an absurd fate. Meanwhile, Bishop Mesa, still in the hall, resisted arrest. He shouted that everyone there was a damned heretic and vowed to uncover the true identity of that accursed thing, insisting that the child was a monster. At that moment, someone made a clean cut across his throat. It was Hilly Joshua who stopped him from speaking further. He declared that the bishop should be grateful for House Joshua's mercy in sparing his neck after so much insolence. Isaac thought that Hilly must have almost decapitated the bishop simply for insulting his family. The confidence on display was astonishing. But as Isaac pondered, people around began to frettingly remark that the baby had just heard horrible things and needed kind words instead. Isaac thought he must be surrounded by lunatics, but then remembered one important fact. The Joshuas were incredibly powerful. His former subordinates had panicked whenever they'd seen those cursed blue-armored knights. The emperor admitted he now felt indebted to House Joshua. He asked Hilly if he could convey to the head of the family that the imperial palace wished to raise the child itself. Hilly replied that the emperor's theatrics were overblown, yet the emperor persisted, saying the Holy Empire had an interest in that boy, both at home and abroad. He wondered whether the so-called blue faith would be strong enough to protect Isaac. Isaac, not fully understanding, wondered what the emperor meant. The emperor explained that the pope in particular would not approve of the boy. His hair color symbolized the empire's ancestors. Moreover, the skeleton king seemed to be watching over the child. Isaac was bewildered. He was the skeleton king. Why would he watch over himself? Healy then apologized to his majesty and said the child, being of direct Joshua bloodline, belonged in their own house. He assured the emperor that neither the pope nor the skeleton king could stand against House Joshua, and if the skeleton king returned, the former Saint Melissa would be more than happy to confront him. The emperor agreed. Hilly added that he could not allow a direct descendant of Saint Melissa to grow up in the imperial palace. Isaac was stunned to hear that name. He couldn't believe it could be the same Melissa he'd battled before coming to this world, that mad saint who had been so difficult to defeat. So not only was he a saintly candidate born of a sacred lineage, he was descended from a saint. Isaac wondered why his life had to be such a cruel joke. Then they explained what a saint was. The gods, who had lost countless times to the skeleton king, wanted above all to one day defeat him. So they poured all their power into creating a supreme weapon, a sacred tool sent from the heavens with the sole purpose of destroying all evil. It was called the Lion of the Battlefield, the knight who wielded holy light. It embodied the empire's great light and rose to the rank of supreme knight thanks to its overwhelming power. Because of that saint's might, everyone believed the demon king would see his last days. Yet the skeleton king was relentless and defeated every saint sent against him. Even so, Isaac thought that he'd never truly slain a saint, because if a saint died, their divine power returned to the gods, who could simply send an even more powerful successor. The last one, Melissa, had indeed been incredibly strong, and now he learned she was his ancestor. Hilly explained that a saint existed solely to fulfill the mission of exterminating the skeleton king. He told the emperor that House Joshua was responsible for producing these saints and carrying out the god's will, a family of immense pride. Hilly declared that House Joshua had the skills to protect the child. Another knight agreed, saying many saints had fallen martyred by the skeleton king, but Isaac thought to himself that he'd killed none of them. The knight then recounted that the skeleton king had once banished a saint to a labyrinth, thinking her too weak to fight, but Isaac remembered differently. He had freed the saint, and she'd simply lost her way. A third knight said 5 saints had died of depression and stress-related illnesses. Isaac thought maybe they should have gone to a hospital. Hilly then looked at him seriously and said it didn't matter if he were cursed. Everyone was grateful for his birth. They wished for him to grow up as terrifying as the skeleton king himself. Isaac was speechless, but in his thoughts, he apologized to parents he'd never known for having been such a terrible person. The emperor then asked Hilly to reconsider, noting that the skeleton king had been sealed for 150 years. Isaac was surprised. He hadn't thought so much time had passed. If Melissa's last battle was at age 50, she would surely be long dead now. But the emperor explained that in the intervening years, demons had grown far stronger. A saint was a precious resource to bolster the empire's power, thus the boy's importance. Furthermore, House Joshua had no active saints at the moment. It had been a year since the last saint had given birth and vanished along with the child's father. Isaac wondered if his mother had been that saint, and if she was still alive. Hilly confirmed that the family's matriarch was indeed alive, and that House Joshua was capable of protecting the child. Isaac thought he couldn't be surprised anymore. Finding out his mother was the saint was more than enough for one day. Meanwhile, the blue-armored Joshua Knights whispered that Melissa had been tearing the Skeleton King's minions to shreds. Isaac was shocked to learn she still lived after more than 200 years. The Emperor remarked it would take time before she returned and asked if the boy was all right. He looked troubled. Isaac wondered if he was truly all right now that he knew his greatest enemy yet lived. If Melissa discovered his true identity, he'd be finished instantly. The others seemed to accept him, but Melissa was utterly insane, and he thought that if he wanted to survive, he'd have to tread very carefully from then on. Then Isaac took the Emperor's finger and asked to go with him, which delighted the Emperor. The Emperor glanced at Healy and signaled that the boy wanted to stay with him, while Healy suggested the child was just being clingy. The Emperor drew the child close and said the Imperial Palace could offer much to the young lord, adding that House Joshua may produce saints but lacked experience raising one, much less a boy. Healy insisted the child would become an exorcist knight who defeated evil, explaining that House Joshua was known for producing the greatest exorcist knights in history. He declared that Isaac would be the first saint ever, something the Imperial Palace wouldn't know how to handle. At that moment, they began tugging on Isaac's arms as if playing tug of war, and one of them remarked that he'd end up torn in two. Isaac thought he wanted to go to the Imperial Palace because, when he'd looked at the Emperor, he'd sensed the same light reacting with his essence. The same light that shone in his core was also present in him. He knew he couldn't miss this opportunity. The Emperor said the young lord had made an excellent choice and wondered what that glow was. Meanwhile, outside, Bishop Massa insisted Isaac was innocent, but that the baby had used mana and so must be a demon. A hooded figure retorted that divine power belonged to the gods themselves, and yet they'd granted that power to a demon. Bishop Massa countered that this was mana and he would never confuse the two, only to be accused of blasphemy and have his head cut off on the spot. Shortly after, another hooded man stepped forward and said they would form an assassination squad again. But Harry replied it wouldn't be necessary because the Emperor wanted to take the child with him, and there would be plenty of opportunities within the royal palace. He said that this time Isaac wouldn't survive inside a carriage. Isaac thought that in that moment he was being taken to Joshua, and recalled everyone wondering why he'd be sent there. A few days earlier, when he'd seen that great glow, he'd wondered what it could be that was so strong. Hilly had commented that Joshua wasn't a good place to raise a child, and said their house kept manicure sets and demonic bodies, the most precious of which was the body of the Skeleton King. It was then that Isaac asked if his own body was there. He thought maybe he should have stayed in Joshua, so he gripped Hilly's hand and said he wanted to go there right then. Hilly was deeply moved. Isaac reflected that it was like giving up a life of luxury to serve in the army, but he understood it was the only way to reclaim his own body, a body he himself had refined, accumulating enough mana to fight the gods. He knew that if he could recover that body, reaching rank 10 would be nothing. It was also the first time he'd seen a survivor Tauten's light shine so brightly, and it meant that following Joshua would be extremely beneficial to ensure his survival. A Joshua scribe then asked why the holy forces were after the young lord. Isaac grew curious and wanted to know as well. Hilly explained that the gods had sent a prophecy saying the saint would be embraced as a child of God, which meant he could become the next pope. So House Barrett was desperately trying to birth a new saint while also plotting Isaac's death. He thought over all of it in confusion, trying to understand what was happening, until they explained that the pope was the most powerful man in all the clergy, able to use rank 10 magic, considered the king of the clergy and of all paladins, an absolute being with power enough to challenge even the emperor. Isaac reflected that it made sense House Barrett was in a panic, for centuries they had been responsible for producing popes, and now that the position could be held by a saint, they'd gone into a frenzy. At that moment, someone suddenly halted the carriage. Healy Wuchis went to see what was happening. It was the coachman warning that they were approaching the border, but there was a problem. A guard appeared saying they could not enter the territory, which angered Hilly, who asked if the guard did not recognize House Esta's seal. But the man replied that no one bearing a saint's blood would be allowed in, for that child must be killed. In truth, that guard and the others were demons in disguise, and Isaac was stunned to realize it. He had been certain he'd forbidden demons from attacking humans. The demon then declared that his glorious king had ordered all saints and sacred beings to be exterminated. Isaac concluded there must be a new demon king, but the enemy claimed the order came from the Skeleton King himself, named Lord Isaac. Isaac was dumbfounded, unable to understand when he had given such a command. The demon said he would spare everyone there if they surrendered the child, but was immediately consumed by divine flames. lives. It became clear it was Healy's doing, as she stood furious and rebuked the demon for blaspheming in front of a Joshua exorcist like her. Healy declared that demons should take heed, for protecting this world's small things was Joshua's sacred duty. They would destroy all evil and cast every demon back to hell's depths. She proclaimed that the Skeleton King was a cursed being who forced his minions to death by his immoral desires. The demons, enraged by Healy's words, charged the knights. When the fight began, one of the knights grabbed Isaac and ran to protect him. However, at that moment, Isaac activated the origin of survival and unleashed his magic, summoning a spirit. He called forth the whisper of the observer, and the spirit appeared, saying it had missed its master very much. Irritated, Isaac told it to be quiet so as not to draw attention, but the spirit admitted it was also happy to see him again. Isaac thought it must really believe the observer had been destroyed, but that it was good to find him again. He had created that being precisely because he had no time to detect magic during combat, so the observer did it for him. Ever since it gained consciousness, the spirit had developed its own personality and remarked that its master was as wicked as ever, claiming Isaac had even stolen a child's body. The spirit grew furious upon seeing that divine magic users had touched its master's body, declaring it could not tolerate dirty hands on a baby. Isaac ordered it to stop talking and start detecting enemy presences. The observer obeyed and began its magical scan, reporting that within a 100-meter radius, there were 88 enemies, all demons, and assuring that none of them would touch Isaac. By then, the knights were managing to defeat many foes, but a new presence appeared, something even more terrifying. The observer detected a lich approaching, standing right before the knight Joshua. The imposing figure demanded to know how they dared touch its king with those filthy hands. The lich declared that everyone there would pay with their lives, and Isaac wondered what could be so powerful in that being. The lich said that its king, its one and only great master, had been unjustly imprisoned in a baby's body, and that in gratitude for being freed, it had developed a deep admiration for Isaac. The lich warned that no one could even look at its master with those disgusting eyes, or it would gouge their eyes out. Luckily, humans did not understand the demonic tongue. The observer commented that the whole situation was a mess, while Isaac thought the lich had probably already discovered that he was the king of skeletons and was following him here. The knights prepared to engage, but Isaac didn't think it needed to end that way. He grew very angry, fighting and shouting to try to stop them from continuing to battle, while one knight begged him to calm down, promising that everything would soon be resolved. The lich realized its master had recognized it and also acknowledged its existence, so it ran toward Isaac, saying it would stand by his side. Eli noticed the lich heading straight for the young master and braced himself. The lich asked how those foolish paladins had managed to seal its master, and Isaac thought that at last it had drawn its attention, which was great. He knew he couldn't let his mana source die, and asked the lich to break the barrier. The lich complied effortlessly and shattered the barrier with a single blow. Isaac discreetly smiled, praised the lich for a good job, and told his subordinate it could rest now. The lich inquired what its master was doing, since it had been sealed again, and asked why Isaac had done that to it. The paladins were utterly shocked, having just seen Isaac transform a demon into a totem right before their eyes. Back at Joshua Manor, everyone began to celebrate, saying that Isaac had turned a demon into a totem in mere seconds. They claimed he possessed the sacred art of the saints and cardinals. However, Isaac knew it wasn't a sacred art, it was magic. Eli remarked that it really had looked like a sacred art of totem transformation. He was impressed to see a child using such an advanced technique, especially without any divine energy emanating from him when he used it. Eli believed the lich had run to the young master because it sensed he was a threat and focused solely on him. One knight commented that Isaac truly seemed to have divine powers and was certain he would become a saint, but Hilly thought he was wrong. After all, that demon had chased a child, and even if he wasn't a saint, he was certainly someone special. He reflected on the curse of the Skeleton King and wondered why it had to happen to a boy, since members of House Joshua suffered from that curse. Then a knight said he'd already decided. As commander of the Knights of Azui, he would protect young Master Isaac because he believed Isaac was the hope of House Joshua. Eli was a bit surprised, but admitted he'd been a fool. Instead of worrying so much about the curse of the Skeleton King, he should have seen that this child might be the true hope. Eli then said they could return home because as uncle he would teach many things to Isaac, and he believed Isaac had great potential. Isaac thought he didn't care whether he became a paladin or not. He just wanted his body back. Eli replied that even if Isaac were destined for an extremely short life, he would find a way to save him, and vowed that his name would be known across the continent. Isaac was confused and wanted to know what short life Eli meant. Eli changed the subject and said that once they arrived home, he would teach Isaac to curse the Skeleton King, which made Isaac think those damned people were plotting something. Later, at the Joshua Manor, the place was beautifully decorated, full of ornaments, both pretty and luxurious. Isaac wondered if they had so much fun while exterminating the demon race, and how much that manor must have cost. He thought those bourgeois scoundrels lived comfortably comfortably while demons starved, and that he himself had endured many hardships just to feed his people. The observer commented that that castle was a paradise compared to the trash castle they had in hell, saying that if they sold the statues, there they could buy 10 brand new castles. Isaac thought he understood and told it to shut up. Eli introduced the place, saying it was Joshua Manor on the continent where exorcism originated, and promised that he would teach everything to Isaac when he grew up. There, everyone was beating a doll of the Skeleton King, hitting it, cursing it, and insulting the figure as part of their training. Isaac found it strange they taught that to children, but thought it didn't matter. Having joined the Holy Empire, he had decided to make the Emperor his personal puppy. The observer remarked that even as the Skeleton King, it was ugly to hurt small children, to which Isaac replied that it should just keep observing. The observer agreed and resumed its magical scan, detecting numerous magic points scattered throughout the manor. Isaac realized there were many manors in the place, over 100, and the observer confirmed it had never seen so many. When they finally arrived and disembarked from the carriage, Hilly ordered that Isaac's room be reorganized so Isaac would share with him, but the servants apologized and said they had orders to take Isaac to the annex instead. Hilly asked what they meant by annex, and the servants explained that the fifth young master had decreed that Isaac could not enter the main house. Hilly was outraged, asking if they were really sending Isaac to a cursed place where people died. Isaac thought it was clearly a family quarrel and realized he should have noticed earlier. Hilly said that her older brother always played that kind of prank. Isaac wondered why he should go to the annex when there was such a huge manor, but the observer whispered in his ear that the core mana was in the annex. Still, Hilly said she wouldn't let her nephew enter that cursed house. Isaac felt torn. He wanted to go to the annex, while Hilly insisted he go to the room, saying she would read him stories from the sacred scriptures and then teach him an exorcism made especially for the Skeleton King. Isaac thought Hilly really wanted to train him. At that moment, someone appeared and challenged Hilly, saying that first he had brought that worm and now wanted to cause trouble. He claimed that he himself had sent the child to the annex and complained that Hilly, after being absent so long, now showed up to challenge their older brother's orders. That man was Gowel Joshua, the firstborn of House Joshua. Isaac, looking at him, thought what an idiot he was. Gowel ordered that they put the little creature down, for he himself would take Isaac to the annex. Eli asked if he was serious, reminding him that the child was part of the direct line of House Joshua, and now they wanted to send him to live in the storage building. Isaac concluded that the idiot didn't want him in the main house, but he still wanted to go to the annex, even if Gowel was a complete. He felt that that was precisely where he needed to be. Gowel said that that little boy was more disgusting than the Skeleton King's body, and asked if they really believed he was of direct lineage. Isaac thought he would go to the annex no matter what because he wanted to go there, but wondered who that really was after all. Anyway, he wanted to go to the annex to absorb the mana. Eli explained that they were trying to mark Isaac as a cursed child, just to block him from the family's line of succession. Isaac was surprised by the word succession and realized this could be a much bigger problem than he had imagined. He concluded he needed to absorb everything that man had so he could become a saint and then the new pope. It was necessary for him to avenge those damned gods. Gowel retorted that it was clear they were trying to stop him because demons had already appeared to hunt that boy, proof that he was already cursed. However, one of the knights answered that it wasn't quite like that, since Isaac had exorcised one of the demons, and the very fact the demon was now focused on him was proof he was special. Gowel sneered, saying it was funny to see everyone so angry trying to cover for that piece of trash, and told everyone to shut up. He taunted that if Isaac were truly a saint, he should prove his abilities. The observer asked its master if they should show Isaac something, but Hilly only thought it should stay silent at that moment. Then Gowel, dripping sarcasm, said that if he really were a saint, he should try to save the family's symbol or anything else that might be of use. He said that the head of the family would love to see that tree revived. Gowel explained that it was a divine tree that had died after absorbing demonic energy, and said that if Isaac truly had the power of a saint, he could easily bring it back to life. Isaac recalled that Melissa was a hard worker, but that her children seemed foolish. However, when he looked at the tree, Isaac noticed something strange and asked if the observer wasn't seeing it. The observer replied that it should go fetch it. Hilly said that no one had managed to save the tree in the last 70 years, and now they were expecting a child to do it. But suddenly, everyone felt something very intense coming from the direction of the tree. Hilly was stunned to realize that the divine tree had been revived. It stood there, alive and full of energy. Gowel, shocked, said that not even the sacred purification arts had achieved that, and asked how it was possible. Isaac thought it was no big deal. There had only been demon-tainted mana in the branches, so the observer went and consumed it all. One of the knights asked if it had been Hai who had done it, but he denied it. Then they asked if it was Isaac, and he awkwardly replied that it had just been mana, feeling somewhat embarrassed. Everyone became emotional when they realized it really had been young Master Isaac. But Gowel, irritated, said that everyone was crazy. No one had been able to save that tree, so how could a mere child have done it? Nonetheless, Nonetheless, no one paid him any attention. They completely ignored him and began to enthusiastically hail young Master Isaac. Ji said that Hai certainly must have done something, then grabbed his arm and accused him of purifying the tree while pretending to be that damned baby. Isaac thought it was not the best moment for Melissa to be out killing monsters. She needed to return home soon and raise her own children. He mused that his older brother Gowl didn't resemble Melissa at all, while Hilly was like a version of her dressed as a man. The observer wondered if they might be half-siblings, and Isaac thought that made sense, since Hilly didn't really look like her father, unlike Gowl. Gowl was still furious, saying they were hiding the truth. He accused everyone of pretending, and that they wanted to push the boy forward as the new candidate for the throne. Isaac began to wonder if there was another candidate in that house, and who the idiot favoring him was. The observer commented that Isaac seemed very calm for someone in the middle of all that chaos. Eli asked Gowl if he really wanted them to abandon the child, since he was their nephew, son of their elder brother, and had the right to be there. Gowl called him an idiot, and said their elder brother was a deserter who fled the house when it was in danger. According to him, now everyone had to look after the garbage of a son he'd left behind. Isaac finally understood why they were treating him that way, and he thought everything was getting more interesting. Gaul said it was okay. He could even be the son of a saint, a half-breed brought from outside to become a new saint, since his brother's wife was a saint. But he wondered if that child was really his son. At that moment, Eli punched Gowl and slammed his face into the ground. Gowl, surprised, asked if he had really hit him, and Eli responded by asking if he didn't deserve it. After that, Isaac thought it was normal since brothers always fight, and he himself had learned many things that way in the past. Of course, everyone tried to break up the fight, but deep down Isaac was happy to see the family so united. This would make it much easier for him to exploit and destroy that damned woman's house. The observer commented that if the house were destroyed, it would also be destroyed, but Hilly simply told it to shut up mentally. Later, inside the castle, Isaac was sulking, annoyed by something. He felt himself growing increasingly irritated because no one in that house seemed normal. He was sitting at the conference table, where some people commented that by turning that poor girl of unknown origin into a saint, she should have been grateful instead of giving birth to a useless boy. Isaac thought those bastards couldn't stop talking about him for a moment. Then a woman silenced them. It was Hannah Joshua, the second wife of the head of the family. She questioned Hilly, saying one of the cadet branches had promised to care for the boy and wanted to know why he had brought him to the main house. Isaac saw in her face how much she hated him and concluded it must have been her who wanted to send him to the annex. Looking more closely, he realized she could only be Gowl's mother. Gowl reinforced the question, saying the mother was speaking as head of the family and wanted to know why Hilly hadn't answered. Healy calmly asked if their father had officially handed that position to her and was told that he had merely been absent for a while. Hilly said it was a pity because she wanted to tell their father in person that Isaac had succeeded in reviving the divine tree. Everyone was impressed, but Gowl stood up, saying it was just a coincidence. No child could ever do such a thing, and the tree had only been saved because the faithful of House Joshua had prayed the whole time. One of the elders agreed with Gowl, saying that the family head had exhausted himself trying to find a solution to the problem, so it didn't make sense that a mere child had saved the divine tree. Henna echoed Gowl's opinion, saying that was exactly what she thought, and asserting there was no concrete proof of it. However, another elder interrupted, saying that even without proof, it was undeniable that the trees being saved was already a blessing. Isaac, irritated, thought that if they wanted proof, then he would give them exactly that. Everyone was completely shocked by what happened next. He began to gather an enormous amount of energy in front of them all. The concentration of power was so great that everyone was incredulous, their eyes wide and mouths agape. What he was gathering was the energy of the divine tree itself. He even tried to answer their provocation, but only baby-like babbles came out, making the situation even more bizarre. Still, everyone felt the presence of that ancient, powerful energy. Some thought it resembled the energy of the Skeleton King himself, that bastard they had mentioned earlier. Henna grew worried and thought Hilly was digging his own grave by defending that boy so fiercely. She asked permission to test the child and requested access to the vault of divine artifacts. Meanwhile, far to the northwest of the Holy Empire, in the Black Forest, a monstrous creature was being beheaded at that very moment. The person carrying out the act declared it a complete waste of time. A knight approached and saluted respectfully, reporting that the vice leader had asked permission to open the vault of divine artifacts. But the head of the house replied that he had made it clear before, no one could touch the sacred vision. The knight explained that the vice leader didn't seek the vision. She only wanted to verify whether the boy really was a saint, since he had revived the divine tree. Now confused, the house head, Eli Joshua, asked why they claimed a saint dwelt under his own roof. He refused the request, warning that the vault would kill anyone who wasn't a true candidate for sainthood, and ordered them to stop fomenting pointless quarrels. There would be no exceptions. At that moment, a woman strode forward and insisted they let it happen. It was Melissa Joshua, who confirmed that it had indeed been Isaac who saved the tree. She argued that the idea of that boy rescuing the divine tree was truly promising. Then she proposed that if they were to open the vault, they should throw in all the candidates at once. The knight warned that a child from another house might seize the most powerful artifact, but Melissa preferred it that way. Someone capable of such a feat deserved it above all, since even the greatest saints in history had never claimed it. She explained that with that artifact in hand, they could even track down the Skeleton King and kill him once and for all. In fact, Melissa declared, they ought to reward whoever retrieved that object. She ordered the knight to spread word that the child who brought back the finest artifact would receive a reward even the Pope couldn't offer. Moreover, the Joshua family's sacred heritage, handed down through generations, would be entrusted to that child, and Melissa herself would teach him the secret techniques, ensuring he had everything needed to succeed. It was then explained that this chest had held divine artifacts and secret teachings for thousands of years. Over generations, only the saint had guarded this sacred vault and prevented it from falling into the wrong hands. House Joshua was its guardian, and only children under 10 could enter. The chest was used in first birthday rituals for saintly candidates. During the rite, the child's future was foretold by the item they drew. However, the vault was extremely deadly. Even aspiring saints could easily perish inside. Because of the deaths and losses accumulated over centuries, it had been sealed away. The observer quipped that now it wondered whether Isaac could safely retrieve the saint's treasure, and Isaac snapped, asking why he was narrating everything. The observer merely asked if he wasn't excited, and Isaac replied that of course he wasn't, especially since they said the Skeleton King's body was sealed in that place. Then, a knight approached him and asked if he was excited. He reported that the matriarch had opened the vault to all saintly candidates, and that the children of the 5 great houses would gather and visit that terrible pope's residence. He was certain Isaac would win. The observer noted the event would be bigger than expected, but Isaac thought that was even better. With many children entering at once, the observer's attention would be divided, making it easier for him to recover the body he sought. Yet the knight warned Isaac to be careful. It was Heli who explained that demons captured during the war were guarding the vault. Isaac wondered if that was why the place was so dangerous, but figured that if they were demons of level 6 or below, he could control them easily. However, Heli said the demons inside were level 8, meaning they wouldn't be easy foes. Isaac wondered who had managed to capture level 8 demons, but the knight revealed the most dangerous inhabitant was a level 9 dragon. Eli confirmed the information, and the observer remarked that House Joshua must be filled with madmen to place a dragon in a baby's first birthday ritual. Still, it said, its vast knowledge of dragons might help Isaac deal with that, and asked why he looked so frightened. Isaac thought dragons posed a different kind of threat, since he'd usually tricked them rather than fought them directly. The observer asked how many dragons he'd fooled. Isaac reckoned about 70 and thought that was bad. Dragons would surely remember and recognize him by soul signature. The observer said it sounded like a perfect chance to switch masters, and Isaac said he'd heard that before, but he had no choice. The vault was full of level 8 demons and a level 9 dragon, and with his current skills, he could only handle demons up to level 5. To defeat them, he decided he'd have to sneak into the annex where the war spoils were stored and steal as many menors as he could to power up. Later, in his room back at the castle, Isaac looked dejected. The observer asked if he was all right, saying he seemed about to be exorcised. Isaac thought that if he could just learn to harness sacred power, he could master the sacred arts easily. The problem was he didn't yet know how. He even considered using mind control on someone to learn, but the observer called him mad for attempting magic within the clergy, warning he'd be branded a demon and killed. Isaac felt his personality had changed greatly over the last 150 years and concluded that mere theory wouldn't help. He needed something practical, even if risky. When he began to tire, someone scooped him up. It was Heli, saying he'd already been through too much that day. Isaac thought it was true. At his age, he needed at least 16 hours of sleep a day. But then, the knight noticed the book Isaac was reading, and Hai used a sacred recovery art on him. Isaac thought that incredible and decided he wanted to learn from that uncle, but the observer said they had to move to another building, so everyone needed to clear out quickly. Isaac agreed, pretending to yawn and go to sleep, to lure them away. The observer wondered who would fall for that ruse. Then the two remarked that he'd fallen asleep so fast it was adorable. As the others departed, the observer commented that Isaac had a wonderful family. Then Heli said to keep the totem Isaac had made. It was his very first. Isaac thought he needed to retrieve it, since he needed the totem's mana. He decided that, having come so far, he would extract a full mana core. He began to crawl out of the cradle, and the observer asked if he thought he could reach the door that way. Isaac replied yes, he had a plan, and asked the observer to open the door. The observer refused to carry him, explaining that a sacred art had locked it. Isaac ordered it to break down the door, but the observer warned they might be mistaken for attackers. Isaac grew furious at being stuck, but knew using magic would only worsen things. Just then, someone flung the door open in his face. It was another child clutching a totem, who teased that the one who had banged on the door was just a baby who couldn't even walk. This child was Shuri Gao's son, who eyed Isaac and wondered if that baby was really his rival. Shuri couldn't believe a baby had made a totem when he, a genius, hadn't. He began to gather divine magic, declaring he would become the next saint, and demanding to know how Isaac dared challenge his position. But Isaac simply lifted a toy at Shuri's face and thought his ride had arrived. Shuri asked if he knew who he was, and Isaac, noting the boy's resemblance to Gowl, assumed he was his son. Realizing Shuri was channeling sacred power to strike, Isaac decided to strike first. He beat the boy mercilessly until Shuri cast a defensive sacred spell. Still surprised, Shuri asked if Isaac was impressed, since he was the only peer who could use a level 3 defensive sacred art. Shuri warned them not to be so impressed, and then unleashed a sacred attack called Holy Light at Isaac. Isaac thanked him for the meal, erected a barrier around himself, and began devouring the attack's power. Shuri couldn't comprehend how he could do that, while Isaac thought his uncle had never taught him, and so, curious, he'd learned on his own. It was as if he were returning all the power to Shuri in thanks for showing him. The boy barely had time to react before Isaac hurled the absorbed energy back at him. When Shuri was struck, the observer remarked it was quite impressive, but asked if it was all right to kill a saintly candidate. Isaac assured no one had actually died, since none of the attacks had truly hit home. Yet Shuri, enraged, warned that such tactics were unacceptable for a saintly candidate. At that moment, a figure appeared, demanding how he dared attack its king. It was the Lich trapped inside the totem, and it threatened Shuri, asking if he wanted to die. Shuri was terrified as Isaac climbed onto the demon's shoulder and said he wanted that bastard to carry him. From Shuri's perspective, he'd been destined to become a saint, leave that cursed house, and become the Pope, but now here he was, enslaved by a baby. He didn't understand why he had to do this, but he knew the Lich was forcing him. The demon ordered the little worm to hurry up and carry him. Of course, Shuri thought it might be wiser to focus on simply surviving first. They approached the annex with Isaac riding like a little horse, and Shuri was already exhausted. He wondered why that crazy baby had brought him so late at night, until he realized they stood before the Joshua Mansion's second annex. Shuri recognized the place and recalled it was said to be cursed. He asked why the baby had led him there, since the househead had warned them to avoid that location. The observer noted hundreds of mana cores lay within, and that Isaac would grow far more powerful with them. Shuri asked if Isaac really intended to enter, pointing out they could die, but the Lich told the Vermizino to keep going. Inside, they walked down old, dust-choked corridors. Isaac found it much more cluttered than he'd imagined, until he noticed something odd. The observer explained that every door was sealed with a magical barrier. Shuri told Isaac they needed to turn back. Everything was locked and impassable. Then Isaac spooked at something and began yanking Shuri's hair. Shuri begged him to stop, but Isaac wanted to see the portraits of the old househeads. Shuri was stunned that this had been Isaac's aim all along and told him not to even think about it. That position was his. But Isaac simply struck the central portrait, smashing the painting of the ancestors. Shuri was horrified at Isaac's destruction. Isaac thought that if barriers were placed on doors, why not on paintings? The observer noticed the barrier beginning to dissipate, so it had worked. Isaac slid down from Shuri's back and rolled on the floor, while Shuri yelled that he couldn't go around smashing everything. Undeterred, Isaac opened one of the doors and declared, "It's here!" He asked the observer to close the doors, but Shuri chased him, demanding to know what he planned. Isaac thought the boy didn't need to know. Then, once the doors had shut, he concentrated on absorbing the mana there. Shuri pounded on the door, begging Isaac to come out. At that moment, someone else entered the annex, Hilly with a group of knights, and asked what Shuri was doing there. Shuri answered that it was because of Isaac, that little monster. But the matriarch asked what he meant. They had made it clear the annex was off limits, yet Shuri had entered and brought Isaac with him. Many had seen him carrying Isaac there, and even noticed traces of sacred magic along the way. They asked if it was Shuri's fault, and he tried to deny it, only to admit he had used a sacred art and taken Isaac inside. Eli stepped forward and scolded Shuri for overstepping, saying he understood how the boy felt, but reminding him Isaac was just a child, and asking where he had locked him. Shuri replied he hadn't locked anyone. Isaac had shut himself in. It was then that Isaac slammed the door shut from within, and the rest accused Shuri of doing it, calling it horrific. When Hilly opened the door, she found Isaac crying and visibly terrified. The matriarch remarked that he was in shock and pitied the boy, while Hilly said he looked shaken but was otherwise unharmed. Then she shot Shuri a severe glare, telling him he ought to be ashamed of what he'd done. Shuri swore it wasn't him, but Isaac, standing behind everything, gave a broad smile and said, "Thanks for the snack," only in baby talk, so nobody understood. Shuri just snapped back angrily, saying that little pest was mocking him. Isaac thought he'd gathered far more mana than expected, the equivalent of an entire century's worth. With all that energy stored up, he could finally put into motion the plan he'd been preparing. The next morning, someone entered Isaac's room to say there was someone there to meet him. It was Hill, bringing a woman named Eily Larsh, introducing her as the new person responsible for taking care of Isaac. She called herself Eily Larsh, a paladin of House Joshua, and declared that she would serve Isaac until her very last breath. Isaac wondered if they were planting someone to watch him because of what had happened the day before. Then, in baby talk, he said he didn't need her and sent her away. The onlookers were a bit shocked, but Eily simply asked Hill for permission to pinch his cheek at least once. Isaac wondered to himself why it seemed like everyone in this place was crazy, but Hill still had one more surprise for him. He brought a gift, saying it was something special from his uncle. When Isaac saw it, he asked if Hill had found it on the ground, finding it odd. The observer commented that he'd heard House Joshua's finances were shaky, but now things seemed even worse than expected. The character asked if the object was a saint's treasure, and Hill explained that he'd received the item from the elders to give to his dear nephew. Isaac examined it, and realized it was a ring worn by a saint during the battle against the Skeleton King. It was an ancient ring containing a small miracle of the gods, and held an incredible amount of holy power. Isaac thought that, in his current state, he could only use that power once or twice, but he also knew there was a way to fix that. Moreover, he noticed Gowl looked irritated, and concluded that Gowl's face couldn't hide the truth. It confirmed the ring's authenticity. Gowl approached with a forced smile, and remarked that his nephew Isaac was always so polite, asking if he'd grown accustomed to the house. The observer commented that he'd finally lost his mind. Gowl felt things were getting very strange. First, the blessing device in the vault had been broken to keep Isaac from obtaining one. Then, he received a saint's treasure. When that treasure was handed to Hill, he naturally questioned it and asked that a similar gift be given to his own son as well. The old woman replied that Shuri had already received a blessing directly from Saint Sides, and he shouldn't be greedy. Gowl thought he should have donated that ring during the ritual of saints, and then tried to reclaim it later, but now they'd given it to Isaac without even knowing what it really was. Gowl turned to Hill and ordered him to give the boy a proper gift, not a piece of junk. Hill got angry and asked how he dared call a saint's item junk. G then told his precious nephew Isaac that there was no point in keeping that useless object since he couldn't even use it properly. He then showed Isaac a far more beautiful ring and explained that it had received countless blessings from the sacred sea and would be much more useful. Not even Hill had managed to get one of those. Isaac calmly stepped forward, but suddenly slapped Gowl hard across the face, closed the ring's box, threw the gift away, and said that junk was only good for dogs. The ring fell into the water, and Hill thought that visually it looked far more valuable than what he had given his nephew. Even so, Isaac chose to keep the ring Hill had given him, and everyone around began celebrating again, saying that Isaac had always been the best. Meanwhile, some people began searching for the ring that had been thrown away. Isaac thought he'd used magic to make it extremely heavy, so no one could find it. The observer remarked that he was impressed by the boy's determination never to touch anything from a rat, but Isaac said he wanted the observer to retrieve that ring that very morning because, even if it wasn't very useful, he could sell it for a lot of money later. In Gowl's office, he was furious. He wondered if they knew how much that ring cost. Even so, he said it was fine. Not as if Isaac could correctly use an elder's ring. It was a good item for someone who couldn't wield sacred arts, but still couldn't be activated without first absorbing holy power equivalent to that of many people. Gale commented that at Isaac's first birthday, there would probably be only about 10 people. However, on the day of the ceremony, the number of guests was far greater than expected. The character told Isaac it was impressive. There were 148 sanctity candidates and more than 4,000 servants and aristocrats gathered there. All the ducal and marquis houses were represented. She also said she'd heard rumors that even other countries had sent their own sanctity candidates, and thought it incredible. Isaac, however, found none of this pleasant. He was completely irritated by the situation. He thought that, theoretically, saints were sent from heaven, or at least that's what they always said, but now they seemed to be falling from the the sky in excess. Eli was also surprised and said it was truly unexpected. He thought everyone would suspect a trap and no one would come. But then someone entered calling for his friend. It was Count Simon Aegis, Eli's childhood friend. Eli asked what Simon was doing there, and he replied that if all the Empire's families had come, he would too. He said the rumor was that the weak men of House Joshua would participate in the ceremony, so everyone had come to see with their own eyes whether it was a trap. Simon commented that the matriarch of House Joshua had offered a great reward and wondered why anyone wouldn't come for that. He even said that not even the Pope's house had resisted the call. Eli couldn't believe it and asked what that meant, saying that the Pope's house would never come to Joshua. Simon replied that all that powerful royalty shouldn't come, but still did. The Barretts said only they were worthy of power and that no one else deserved it, but the truth was, everyone was there. Eli asked Simon to lower his voice, but he replied that his own son was also a sanctity candidate, and since Joshua was organizing everything, the Pope's family shouldn't be involved, but clearly they were. Eli explained that was why everyone had to be careful with their words, until someone opened the door saying there was nothing more dangerous than a vulgar friend. It was Bishop Barrett who appeared to say that old sayings are never wrong. Eli then turned confused, wanting to know what Cardinal Barrett was doing there. Barrett replied that the weak boy of the Joshua family was organizing the first birthday ritual, and that he was praying that this boy could take something valuable from the vault, something to save the family's reputation. He was especially curious to see with his own eyes the Joshua family's sanctity candidate, who claimed to be a saint but had not yet appeared. Barrett saw the situation as a great opportunity and hoped the Joshua candidate would elevate the family's name. Meanwhile, Hill wondered if everyone there had fallen into the Sea Saints trap, because he found it very strange that the number of sanctity candidates had jumped from 25 to 148 in just 1 week. It made no sense. The only explanation was that the Sea Saint had ignored all proper criteria and approved any child just to favor his own interests. Everyone wanted their own child chosen as a saint. If all those children were thrown into the vault together, they'd end up with weaker competitors. It seemed the perfect scenario for a dark plan to be set in motion. Eli then turned, worried, thinking Isaac could be in danger. It was then explained that the males born of the Joshua lineage, despite their impressive appearance and the family's reputation, were generally considered useless. Even so, many desired his superior blood or sought the all-powerful Pope's favor, and thus, a Joshua man was always a tempting prey. It was common to see people trying to make these children interact with Joshua's descendant, not to kill him directly, but to ensure he could do nothing. For that reason, many mixed sacred poison into the drinks of the Joshua lineage children. In fact, everyone present that year had done so. They had poisoned the beverages to guarantee the Joshua heir's death. To everyone's shock, Isaac simply drank all the poison as if it were a normal drink. No one could believe it. He gulped it down like water and even commented sarcastically that he felt no effect. The other children were terrified, not understanding how he didn't faint or get sick. Some began to cry, saying they wanted to go home. Isaac, on the other hand, threw the bottle at one of the children's heads and demanded more drink. The other children were desperate, and the adults watched in disbelief, since he showed no signs of pain or poisoning, not even a simple stomachache.